I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing good. Looking forward to having you on the show. You and I have a lot of common friends. We met at the YC Escape, and you've got quite an interesting story. And you had a very long form post in our group, kind of giving the rundown. And as you and I were just chatting before we got on the recording, there's a lot of entrepreneurs and owners that have gone through their journeys and tend to make it sound better and hide a lot of the internal stuff. And you've been very open and an open book about it. But so before we get really into the meat of it, why don't you kind of give our listeners a little bit of a backdrop of how'd you become an entrepreneur? What was the business, and what were some of the major milestones that you had as you were going?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a family with an entrepreneur as a father. So early on, he had me working in his stores and taught me what hard work was. I think I knew from that point on that I wanted to eventually, at some point, I didn't know where or what, but I wanted to run the show, so to speak. I kind of like the aspect of him being in charge.
What kind of business was it?
So he had a couple businesses, import export business, and then a retail shop, and it was all around fine china and collectibles like Lalique, Baccarat, Waterford, Hummels, all that Yadro, all that fun stuff, and China. So I still say to this day, whenever I get married, eventually, if that day does come, I'll probably know more about the China and the glasses than my spouse. So that'll be an interesting dynamic. But yeah, so I grew up in that. He actually wanted me to take that over, but I had zero interest in that business. Not an interesting business to me. And as it was really popular in the 80s, but as more women entered the workforce, then those specialty shops became more challenging to run and to be profitable because the malls really, especially this is back East Coast, malls all over the place. So you have your one-stop shopping where you can shop, for your spouse, your kids, yourself, everywhere in one place. So that kind of, ended his business in the early 2000s. But I went on to take a job. I went to University of Maryland when I graduated there. I took a job in sports advertising for 4 years. I did really well there, but I disagreed with the ownership and how they ran the company. So I left. My good friend convinced me to go into staffing. He was at a staffing company for 4 years. He wanted me to join him. He said, "You'd be awesome at this. We'd crush it together." So I'm like, all right, sounds good to me. So I took a job at another staffing firm for 1 year so I could learn everything on their dime. And then I eventually left and joined him. I worked with him for 4 years in New York City. And then I was calling on E-Trade Financial, and they didn't have any business in New York, New Jersey, but they said to me if I knew somebody in Sandy, Utah, they're trying to hire 200 financial service reps in the next 3.5 weeks.
Oh.
So at the time, my company didn't want any business outside New York and New Jersey. And I happened to know one person in staffing outside a metropolitan area who was in Utah. So it was almost like the gods
Everything
aligned, and it was like laid out there for me. So we put a bid on the project, won the project, filled all 200 positions on budget, on time, and then then we got additional projects in Alpharetta, Georgia, Jersey City, and Tampa, Florida, and we filled 800 positions in 1 year just for E-Trade.
Holy cow! How many people did you have to interview to get 800 people placed?
Oh, a lot.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
So what was your buddy before you guys started the business? What was he doing, or did he run the business and then you went and joined him?
Yeah, so he was a president of that business. He was working for an owner that we both knew. We all grew up in the same town together. So we had the owner who grew up in our town, then my buddy who worked his way up to president, then he brought me on as director. And then after all that E-Trade stuff happened, he actually got into a dispute with the owner. They ended up breaking apart, and that's where I kind of exited. And I went to Utah to help open Parallel HR Solutions with my ex-business partner, based off the success we had and all that E-Trade stuff. And I was going to stay there for 6 months, and I ended up staying there for 11 years.
6 months, 11 years. I mean, split the
You know,
difference, right?
what do
Yeah.
they say? Six of one, half a dozen of another. Well,
Almost,
not
oh, yeah, almost.
exactly, but something like that.
So your buddy that was the president, that whole business disappeared, and then you guys started parallel HR.
No, that yes and no. That business did disappear because he got in a legal dispute with the owner, and he ended up getting fired, like in court. He's the president of a company, built it up to 11 million. That company ended up dissolving, ended up going away, being run into the ground because my buddy was gone and the owner
Mhm.
didn't know what he was doing. And my buddy started his own company in New York, and then I went to Utah with my ex business partner.
Got it.
I had worked with her for that 1 year the first year in staffing that I went
Okay.
to work with this other company. That's where I met her.
Got it.
So I went to Utah. I was going to spend 6 months and help her get the company up and off the ground and running. And I landed a huge account right away, overstock.com, which is a big client of mine. They're based in Salt Lake City, Utah. And it was just off to the races. And basically, my buddy was offering me 30% to go back to New York and help him open up. And she was offering me 50% to stay in Utah. And I made all decisions based on money at that point in my life. So it was kind of a no brainer to me, and I stayed in Utah and had to tell my buddy that I grew up with and knew all these years. And we had talked about opening all these years together. I had to tell him, yeah, I changed my mind. I made a different decision.
How do you take that?
It was one of the toughest conversations at the time that I ever had to have because we had been talking about it for years that we
Mhm.
were going to open up together. And I understood why he was only offering me the 30 and not the 50% because he was in the business 4 or 5 years longer than I
Right.
was.
Right.
He had a lot more context. He put a lot more sweat equity into it all, and all that stuff. But yeah, at the end of the day, like I said, I just didn't. I made decisions solely on money, and to me, 50% was more than 30%. Even though I didn't really look at how big each pie would be at the end of the day. So, how big the pie is kind of relevant to assessing that.
The circle graph looked the same, but you just didn't have any numbers tied to them,
Yeah,
right?
because at that point, both the circle graphs had nothing in them. So
So what was so your partner there, what how did you guys structure it? I mean, and what was it just off to the races because you guys are growing so fast? But like what was the kind of the original foundation of like the equity and like the operating agreement? Was there any kind of communication around where, because I know that's kind of where this, probably lead to, right? Is, how does that make sense? Like what did you have this?
yeah, basically, so we wanted to be certified as a minority-owned, woman-owned business. So we couldn't do it minority-owned, but we were able to do it women-owned. So she owned 51% of the company. And I came in, and then it was her husband at the time set up all our infrastructure and everything. So he had like a 9% interest or something.
Hmm.
So I came in at 40% with a 9% option
Hmm.
basically. So upon sale or anything, it would be split 51-49 on the sale number.
Hmm.
But and then in terms of payments and commissions and salary, it was 50-50.
Got it. Did you guys have any distinguished rules around ownership versus like salaries and W two? Because there's a lot of people that get stuck into, hey, we're both owners, we had the same salaries, same distributions, or was there just kind of grow and we're both going to split everything 50-50, have the same salaries?
Yeah, so we didn't really pay ourselves salaries at first. We just, we had other corporations kind of set up. We were kind of doing it that way in the beginning, where we would pay our corporations, our individual corporations, for our services that we were providing to the company only when we were profitable and made money. So we weren't taking like salaries at first
Hmm.
because we were hiring people. So
Right,
everything was
you're
kind of.
piling it all back into the business.
Yeah, so anything we made at the end of the year, then we would take distributions or whatever and pay each other. But we ended up switching that and then being W-2 employees at some point. But after 5 years, about, I bought her out of the company.
So let's kind of take some of these milestones because we don't have to go into the technical stuff because I know you've got a great story about kind of some changing things that have happened in your life. But like, what was like, how big did the business go from employees or revenue size? I mean, and what led to the triggering event of you buying her out?
So we were a full-time staffing company.
Permanent or okay?
Permanent employment was our main focus. We did some contract, but permanent employment. So,
Hmm.
you're obviously not having people on your payroll billing a lot of billable hours. So the revenue model looks a little different.
Hmm.
So we had built the company up to about 5.5 million in revenue over the first 5 years. And that's when I bought her out. I think
Hmm.
we had at that point about 30 employees
Okay.
with offices in Salt Lake City, Utah, Lewiston, Idaho, and Nashik, India. And so we had three offices with about 30 people spread around. And I was looking to expand. And I wanted to go into New York and I wanted to build it up more. And she was really content at the size of the company. She wanted to spend more time with her kids and all this other stuff. So she was working less and less, and I was working more and more. That's where the friction started happening. I mean, I was working 10, 12-hour days, and she was working like 6-hour days and spending all this time with her kids, which I was fine with. I'm like, hey, if you want to spend time with your kids, I totally get that. Like,
Hmm.
I kind of like your kids. I'd like to spend some time. But, if I'm working 10, 12 hours and you're working like 6, 8 hours, then this isn't a 50-50 deal and we're not going to split things.
Hmm. So then, how did you approach that final conversation then, and how did you value the business and determine which route you were going?
So we had our lawyers actually do that, but I angled it. So I bought the business because that's what I wanted to do. So,
Hmm.
I
Yep.
mean, I had the relationships with all the clients, and she had really built the internal operations and had a lot stronger relationships with some of the employees. Like, for instance, the India office, she opened it herself. Like, I had never met the India team. I worked with them every day. We talked every day, but we didn't meet in person. Like, she had been over there 3 times.
Hmm.
So we just got to a point though where we were butting heads, and there would be days we didn't even speak to the offices right next to each other. So
Hmm.
it was very awkward, and it was like not a good time. It was very tense, and it was also very juvenile, I think, of both of us. And I certainly made a lot of mistakes that I would handle differently if I could go back in time. But you live and you learn, and you take those lessons and move forward with them.
So then, how, did you pay her out over time? And then that was 5 years in, and you said you were there for 11 years. So how did that kind of come and go? And then what was the kind of the next couple chapters?
Well, I wish I could say it came and gone, but it came and it sat there for a long time. So after we went to the lawyers had us in separate rooms, going back and forth, like trying to negotiate the first thing we wanted to do is negotiate a number and then decide who was going to buy.
Is it like a shotgun clause or something like that? You just
Yeah,
going back. I
well,
mean, you
yeah.
wanted the
So
business, right? I mean, so
I wanted it the whole time. So
yeah.
I was telling the lawyers, I'm like, it doesn't make any sense for her to keep it. She doesn't have any relationships with the clients. But you need to go back in there and keep telling her that. And so eventually, anyway, I got what I thought I wanted, which at the time I did want, which was I wanted to buy the company. So I did. So I had to take a big loan, obviously, to pay her off and all this other stuff. But within 6 months of purchasing that company, I found out she, well, I thought violated the contract because she actually had an affair with the director in India, and the director in India, who she's actually married to now. She got divorced from her husband and then married the director in India, brought him over here, has twins with him. Okay, so like within the first 6 months of me buying the company, we were doing like $1 million in deals over out of our India office,
Hmm.
and it just tanked. It just completely tanked. She was over there like 3 times within the first 6 months, and because she was
Were they
friends with
just
all of them.
distracted? Was she just distracting him, and he
Oh
just
yeah,
was
they
working?
weren't working hard for me. They didn't give a shit about me. Like they
Hmm.
didn't care. Like there was her. She was their savior, and blah 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 blah. So there were like I don't know, I can't. 14 employees, and like one day, like when she was over there, like 9 of them walked out on me.
Oh my God!
Yeah. So
And
um,
so your payment and the value wasn't tied to like retention of revenue or profits or anything like that.
no, no. I just paid what I thought the value was, and then
Hmm.
I paid a big chunk up front on closing, and then I owed 4 more payments over 2 years. so every
Mhm.
6 months,
Mhm.
right? And when the first payment was due after all this was going on, I was like, hell no. I mean, the company I just had paid her $1 million for the company.
Mhm.
And the company was just going down the tube. And all of a sudden, I'm like in a sinking ship after I just paid all this money, which I owe. And
Mhm.
she, and I felt she's disrupting everything and violating the agreement. So I had my attorney send her a letter saying that we were doing an internal investigation into all this. And then she countered by suing me. So then I countered by countersuing her.
Oh my
So
god.
then we were off to the races. And that lawsuit lasted 6 years. 6 years. So I had friends who were married and divorced in a shorter period of time than my lawsuit lasted.
Oh, the mental energy that just gets sucked out of that. I mean, how are you dealing with that and running a company?
Very poorly. I didn't do a good job. I was angry all the time. I felt very heavy feeling. I wasn't a great leader. I kind of did things by the seat of my pants, and I made a lot of poor emotional decisions, especially with the lawsuit, but also in the business itself. Because at the same time, I was trying to expand into New York. So here I am, like in New York, hiring all these people in New York, these new employees, trying to integrate them with the India team, the Utah team, the Idaho team. And it was just way too much for me to handle. And I didn't have the right people in place to be able to elevate what we already had. So I made some emotional decisions,
What are
and
some? What are
I
some of the ones?
always took things personal too. Like if somebody wasn't working hard, I took it personal. Like that's an attack on me. You're not working hard, right? And that's not how you run a business, right? So yeah, I mean, with the lawsuit especially, one of the biggest lessons I learned is that there are two people not to ask for advice when you're in a lawsuit. One are the actual lawyers.
I was just gonna say, I bet you they paid for a lot of stuff over 6 years too.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
in their personal lives, they were doing all right.
yeah. They're fine. They're getting paid. Whatever. They don't care. Um, do you know who the others are? Not to ask for advice if you're in a lawsuit.
I don't know where this is going. No, I'm curious in your answer.
Your parents. Okay,
Interesting. Well, why do you say
because
that?
your parents have a bias to protect their children. And so, however they're going to answer, even if they're very pragmatic, right? They can't help but want to protect you.
Hmm.
So, if somebody's attacking, at least in my scenario, whenever I was attacked in this lawsuit, my father, who I'm very close to, his advice would be attack back, right? Don't you dare let her do this to you, you know? And that permeated throughout most of my decisions throughout this entire lawsuit. So he didn't realize he was doing this,
Hmm.
and he didn't, that's just his nature, right? That's
Right.
just how
Right.
he is. So he thinks he's doing it in a protective manner, I didn't realize it until after the fact either, because I was so emotionally wrapped up in it and emotionally involved and took it so personal that I couldn't separate what is the smartest thing for the business and what is the smartest thing for myself personally and my sanity and my finances and all of that. I
Hmm.
couldn't separate that away from my ego. My ego, which says nobody's going to F with me,
Hmm.
right? My ego, which says if you attack, I attack back. My ego, which says I don't lose, I only win. Even like who the hell even knows what that means? It's so
Yeah, it depends on what your definition of winning is, right?
it's just such a juvenile way of thinking. Like you're a child, right? And that's how I made a lot of decisions, which exacerbated my situation and which
Hmm.
continued to extend it year over year when I could have definitely made some decisions where I took a couple steps back. If I had the tools I have now, maybe I meditated before I, told my attorney, go do this or go do that. Um, and I'd come
Like
back
it's
and
like a shotgun, right?
yeah, yeah, I'd come back in a calmer state and be able to make a, a more strategic decision for everything that was involved instead of shooting from the hip, driven by and fueled by emotion.
So where were you, and what was the triggering point where you realized what was going on, that this self-perpetuating situation kept getting worse and was exacerbated by the emotions? I mean, like, what happened, or like, was there an epiphany? Like, how did you, where were you and what happened?
I was in Bali actually, and it was a couple of years ago. I took a trip with. I'm part of a bunch of these tribes, like you and I are in YC, right? I consider that a tribe. I'm in a bunch of
Yeah.
tribes, right? One of them is called Unconventional Life, and it was like it's deemed as a business accelerator, but it's really a lot of people who are trying to create the life on their own terms and live the life they were meant to live, right? So people who don't want to necessarily go into a 9 to 5 job and go into an office, people doing all different sorts of uh, things like that wouldn't be in my life if I wasn't part of this group. So like somebody doing energy or astrology or like stuff, somebody doing like energy or astrology and stuff like that. Like in the past, I would laugh at those people and I would be like, they're a scam. Like I wouldn't even be able to talk to them or take them serious. But now I have a new outlook on life because you can't make a judgment on something you've never been exposed to, which I used to always do. I used to
Hmm.
always judge things I was never exposed to. So I mean, it's another sign of ego.
Hmm.
Right?
So
So
I was like, what in that then? What, like, was it like a breakout or a
yeah,
person? Okay.
so it was a breakout session where two people were talking about flow consciousness
Mm.
and living in flow. And the whole premise of that is how you make decisions, making decisions from your heart versus your head all the time. And if it's not a hell no, it should be, excuse me, if it's not a hell yes, it should be an F no in everything you do in your life. And that's just not how I made decisions. Like I just made, like if a friend called me up and said, "Hey, let's go out tonight. Let's go to this place," and I really didn't want to go, like I'd allow them to convince me to go, and and that's how I live my life. Right? I
Hmm.
was allowed other people to influence decisions that I made, and it's good to get input from people and everything. But when you're living a life like that, you're not living to your highest intuition, right?
Hmm.
And that's really what it's all about. And I called that BS on everything they said when I was sitting and listening to them. They said, "Hey, let's talk afterwards." And so I talked to them for about an hour afterwards. I still didn't believe what they were saying because they were giving, like, they were just telling me about all these amazing things that's happened in their life by living these principles. And they've studied this for years and years and years.
Hmm.
And they were offering this course, when we got back to the States online. And my first intuition was like, no, again, this is a scam. This is what I think about all these people. They pull you in, they kind of fish it, reel you in a little
Yeah.
bit, and then they hook you. Oh yeah, it's $800 for this course. And my whole attitude towards that is, it's going to scam me. But after I spoke to them, when I flew back from Bali to the US, it's a long flight, so I had a lot of time to think about things. And I just started thinking to myself, would it be so bad to live a different way?
Mm.
Like, would it be so bad to be optimistic every day?
Just questioning your paradigm. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I just felt so heavy as a person. Every day I woke up, I just felt weighed down and heavy.
Hmm.
I had all these things that were going on, and a lot of other things that I haven't even discussed, but all these things that were going on in my life, and I felt stuck. I used to be the guy who walked down the street, and if somebody was walking on the other side and they were looking at me, in my mind, I was thinking, "What the f is that person looking at?"
Yeah, just
Right?
like, feeling like everybody's out to get you.
Totally. Instead of just being like smiling at a stranger and saying hello.
Where did all that come from? Was it? Can you, have you pinpointed it?
Well, I mean, it's kind of the East Coast. You grow up on the East Coast, you grow up with a certain mentality. It's really like, if you're working in New York City, especially, just grind, 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 work, work, work. The more, nicer suits, bigger watches, nicer cars, like, status this, status that. And, I got sucked into all that. And, I also had a addiction issues. So I had a gambling addiction. for 25 years.
Oh my gosh.
I've been clean for 13 years. I started gambling when I was 7 years old. Like my uncle introduced me to it, and that got me in a very negative mindset as well. So I was like always just negative about shit.
Hmm.
And then that affects. But at the same time, then at a party or something, I'd be the life of the party. Nobody would know a thing is going on or going wrong, right? But I was miserable. It was just an escape for me.
Yeah, the
So
internal conflict must have been just super heavy. So, as you started asking yourself those questions, I mean, I mean, there was probably cracks in your reality then. I mean, what was some of the first actions, and how did you start looking at all of the things that you were going on in different perspectives? I mean, what was the kind of the chain of thoughts?
I mean, I can tell you the first action. I remember the first day I got to Bali before I even went into that room and heard that session and had this epiphany. I was talking to a girl there about how I was wasting so much of my life watching reality television every night for like 2 hours every night. I was so, so exhausted from the business that I would just come home. I'd go work out and then I'd
Numb
come
your
home.
brain.
Yeah, just numb my brain. And I made a commitment to her that first night that the first thing I was going to do when I came back is get rid of my cable boxes and return them to the cable TV company.
Hmm.
And so I did kind of fib a little bit because it wasn't the first thing I did. I actually had to watch the DVR saved up and clear everything off the DVR
One
before
last hit, right?
one last fix, right? So I did all that and then I returned them. And I remember how amazing I felt by doing that one little thing.
Hmm.
Like just going into Xfinity, which is a company it's called in Utah, and giving them
Mhm.
my boxes back. And they're like, oh, we'll give you this free and that free and that. I'm like, I don't want anything. Okay.
Yeah, I
I
want some
want to be
freedom.
free.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
I want to be free. So I remember taking pictures and posting it, and it just felt like this weight off my shoulder. It's crazy. It's hard to describe, but just so that little move set gave me a little bit momentum to take the next move to start listening to podcasts, for instance. Right, we were talking before the show about podcasts and Lewis House, which is a great podcast that I always listen to now.
Yeah.
And I never had listened to a podcast before that, so I started incorporating some of these positive podcasts into my morning. So instead of listening to Howard Stern and sports radio, which I always listen to, and which are entertaining, but they're mind numbing, you don't have to think, it doesn't help put positive thoughts in your mind, get your day started right. I then shifted over and listened to something that was a little bit more inspiring for me and positive. And then that starts your day off a little different. Then you start incorporating small changes. And what I always like to say to people is the smallest change can lead to the biggest outcome.
Hmm.
It's about taking that initial first step regardless of what it is. And I didn't realize it at the time that initial step of returning these cable boxes would then lead to another small step, and all of a sudden that made like, holy cow, massive change,
Hmm.
right? Just by taking those small steps. Because if you think about, hey, I want to change all this in my life, like it becomes daunting and
Hmm.
overwhelming.
Hmm.
And you're like, oh my God, I can't.
Now you
But
go
if
back
you
to the
really,
same thing, right?
it's just like, our minds are the most powerful thing that we have. We can convince our minds anything. Okay. Whether it's to stay on that, to do 5 more reps in the gym, or whether get off that treadmill, or eat that extra ice cream, or, the world is out to get me, or I can't trust this person, or I got to work harder, whatever it is,
Hmm.
right? Whatever it is, positive or negative, like our mind can control the actions that we take. And it's up to us to program our minds with positive actions. So, and surround ourselves with positive people, because that's kind of how you're going to follow them or lead, if you have those type of people around you.
And so, what were some of the things that you were realizing, like the feedback that you're getting? So, obviously, your life is changing as this, and then how about the interaction with your business? How did you start looking at the lawsuit and your employees, the people that you're surrounding yourself with? Because I think, in the context of the question, Michael, is that I think a lot of entrepreneurs they build. Like I was telling you before the recording that that there's a lot of egos are driven behind building businesses, from the top line revenue and people getting these groups, and it's just compare, compare, compare. And then it was our personal situation that kind of changed our paradigm as well. But like a lot of these entrepreneurs, they get to this point where then they're stuck, because like all of a sudden they themselves start to change, but then they're surrounded by vendors, clients, and employees in this whole situation. That how do you change when you're in this situation? So how did you ripple those different things into the business and the situation that you're in?
So, interesting question. I don't know that I did. Okay. I continued to, so I started changing my outlook on things. But I realized that when I had certain situations come up, especially let's go to the lawsuit, okay, where I actually had a chance to settle right before we went to trial,
Hmm.
I didn't,
Why?
because I thought I had grown and I wasn't quite ready. I had to learn another lesson. And I emotionally, I wasn't done doing cost benefit analysis in my head as to what the right thing to do, because I was so involved, because I was already 5.5 years into the suit. And then we were finally going to trial. But I was, offered, yeah, we discussed the settlement right before trial. And there was an amount we kind of came close to agreeing to, but never quite pulled the trigger. And, you know, I, I just didn't. I didn't do it, and I didn't realize that I was making this. I was again. I went back, asked my dad what he thought, and like and then after I made the decision, then all of a sudden we're getting prepared for trial and stuff, and the fees are just mounting and mounting, and I could have ended all that. So where I actually went through a 6-day trial, right?
Mm.
This is all over 350K, by the way.
Yeah, I believe it.
So I went over a 6-day trial. The jury actually came back and they found that I didn't owe her 350. I owed her the 350, but she caused 260K in damages. So the net was 90K that I owed her, right? But no, it gets better. So like the judge though said, I'm not certifying this ruling until you both agree on attorney fees. So now we're trying to agree on 5.5 years of attorney fees.
Holy shit.
She wants $500,000 in attorney's fees from me. And I'm like, hell no, because she technically was the prevailing party, even though she was trying to get 350 and they're awarding her 90K. So this went on and on and on.
Oh my
So
god.
this is 8 months later and they still can't work out the attorney's fees. So that's when and she was threatening, if we don't work these out, I'm going to appeal. She could still appeal the verdict. And then I'm going to appeals court. And then that's another year to 2 years. And I had already been going on for 6 years. And I was just like, look, I can't do this anymore. Like I told my attorneys, or I said, I'm just going to call her up and offer her something to settle this. Because it was either pay her or pay the attorneys. I mean, the fees are just keeping on mounting up.
Mm-hmm.
And the attorneys were ruthless in their fees. I had a worse experience with my attorneys than I did with
Suing your partner.
yeah, totally. So I ended up calling her and settling on the 350 that I originally owed her. After the jury ruled that I actually technically only owed her 90K.
Because
Because I didn't like with the fees and with all that stuff. Like I just didn't want it to go on and on. It was clear that we were not going to agree on attorney's fees, and then it would go to the judge, and then the judge would have to make a ruling, and then she could appeal that, or I could appeal that, and then now we're talking 6 months more, a year more, and the attorney's fees are racking up and everything after 6 years. I'm just like, there's no way I'm not doing this anymore. I'm like, I don't care if I lose everything I have. So I made a decision that I was going to sell the company and take the money from the sale and pay off the lawsuit. And that's exactly what I did.
oh my gosh. I mean, so
And it felt amazing.
I was gonna say it, and like there's so many questions, and so
It felt amazing, even though like I spent on this whole lawsuit, right, between her and attorneys, $1 million. $1 million should be in my bank, but it's not. right? So all those years of working and everything down the drain. So now I have like no money, but I don't care because like that
That's
is
awesome.
not how I live my life, right? And first of all, I know how to make money. So if it came to it and I needed to go and sell something, like I could sell ice to a damn Eskimo. I mean, I don't, I'm very comfortable in being able to make money. So, you know, that's why I was fine, like selling the company and taking everything that was all the proceeds from the sale and settling this lawsuit and paying these attorneys off um, because I'll figure it out down the road. And plus, it's not how I make decisions in life anymore. Like what I want to do is impact other people. Okay, and you don't need money to do that.
Mhm.
Obviously, I need to make a living somehow, but the best feeling right now is I actually don't know how I'm going to do that. And because I'm on a 6-month transition contract from selling the company,
Mhm.
I have 1 month left. And then after that, I'm writing my book. But other than that, how I'll make money, I'll figure it out. It's more of living in that flow, state of flow, and being able to choose what projects you want to be a part of that are of the highest level of interest, that are going to bring the highest excitement to you, that you could really make an impact on. And I'm finally, after 20 something years, 30 years, whatever, I'm old. I'm finally in that position to do that and not have any restrictions of you have to do this or you have to do that, which so many people box themselves in and convince themselves that they can't change it, but they can because I did.
Where were you when you had this switch in the feeling where you felt the shackles come off?
Um, so when I sold the car, I mean, it slowly started happening. Like settling the lawsuit was like felt great. And then selling the company also felt great because I actually became, I started to have an adversarial relationship with my own company. Like
Mhm.
I started hating my own company.
Because you
I didn't,
saw all of that garbage in every aspect of the business, is my guess.
I just hated the business. I started like, it's not, I didn't have a great business setup to begin with. Doing direct hire and everything. You don't have that consistent flow of contract of like billing coming in, so it's very high pressurized. So we shifted the model a little bit, but it was just a bad business model, and it wasn't a great sustainable business the way I had it set up. And it's extremely pressurized, and you're just dealing with people all the time. And like I love people, but I don't need to get a phone call that somebody overslept their alarm 45 minutes late for an interview. Like I don't care. Like okay, like this is not what I want
I
to spend
always
my time with at this point in my life.
I always I always wondered about the people that are in the recruiting business because I know a lot of them, and you start it because you like people and you know connections and know how to move people in the right direction, but then all of a sudden people become your inventory, and you end up seeing people in a different light. And I this one gal, she's like, she became super cynical. She's just like, oh my gosh, why are these people just not doing the things that they should be doing? So
Yeah, it's I found if you lower your expectations, you're always pleasantly surprised.
well, that's not ideal, right?
I'm not saying it's
right,
ideal. I'm just saying that that
right.
worked for me.
Who'd you sell the business to?
So I actually sold it to my best friend, who got me into the business to begin
No
with.
way.
Yeah, yeah. So everything comes full circle, and he got me into business, and he's getting me out of the business. So
Did he?
he has a $20 million company in New York that focuses primarily on nurse staffing and admin staffing, and he
Mhm,
wanted to add technology staffing
mhm.
to his suite of services. So he bought it.
Wow. Was it a earnout or upfront payment or a combo, or what was the structure of it?
Yeah, it's kind of a upfront payment. I needed the money to settle the lawsuit, basically.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, it was
So,
upfront
well,
payment.
let's with what you've got going on right now, and how your mindset has changed so much. And as I've been, as we've been following each other in different circles, I mean, explain I don't know, is there principles that you're running your life on in your day to day, or like as you look to the next venture, who are I know Parveen and Activate, you can kind of give them a plug. I want to hear, how you're interacted with that. But then you were at Lewis House's conference. So what are the things that you're doing, and are there principles, and there's kind of, is there a foundation that you're building to move forward with?
Yeah, well, first off, I'm writing my book, which is called Chasing the High. And it's
Mm.
really about my entrepreneurial journey, about addiction, about lawsuits, about the lessons that I've learned along the way, and about, the challenges in overcoming them. So I really want to dedicate my life now to helping others, whether it's helping others not make the same mistakes I did from an entrepreneurial aspect, whether
Hmm.
it's helping others through recovery because I've gone through that, or whether it's helping the homeless and feeding the homeless, like whatever it is, or helping
Hmm.
humanitarian things. I'm involved in all aspects of these things. So that's kind of what the book is about. And I'm going to Bali again the end of November, day after Thanksgiving. I have a one-way ticket, and I'm not coming back till the book is finished. So
Oh, cool.
I'm about three-quarters of the way done with the book. So I think I should be able to bang it out in the month of December, and then come back, and then probably book will be out in March. I would assume March or April. So I'm doing that. I started a new series called Fate, Fate, from addict to entrepreneur. And I interview former addicts who are now entrepreneurs and have multi-million dollar businesses. And I write articles for Thrive Global about those interviews, which is Ariana Huffington's publication.
Hmm.
And I'm possibly going to look to turn that into a television show. So I could totally see that being a show on like TLC or something. So
Super cool.
yeah, I'm excited to see what happens with that. So those are kind of the two things, two of the several other things that I'm working on. And I also partner with a company called Ignite Journeys, and I'm going to Mexico with them on a 4-day humanitarian trip where they go into like impoverished areas and they give back to the community, and they take executive teams though. So that's their spin. They take executive teams for like a week, or
Wow.
for excuse me, for like 4 days, to these places where the executive team gets to spend time with each other outside of the office and build like a different type of bond and relationship, and give back to the community and
Right.
make a
Right.
big
That's
impact.
awesome.
Yeah, so they want me to be an ambassador for them. So they invited me on a trip to check it out. And if that goes as expected, then I most likely, will be promoting their service as well, and maybe reaching out to my my business contacts,
Hmm.
which I can't, I don't want to. I mean, it's 11 years, 15 years really of relationships. So I'd like to be able to
Keep
continue,
nurturing them. Yep.
yeah, keep nurturing them in some aspect, especially something positive like that. So those are the things that I'm working on right now. In terms of your original question, which was like kind of the pillars of what I live by and everything. Yeah. So we did start activation a couple of like a year or so ago, and was it a year ago, 2 years ago? I can't remember. It was around the same time frame. Everything kind of happened. It was 2 years ago. And Parveen and I and our buddy Joey were actually driving in a car from Park City up to an event YEC had in Utah. And Parveen turned to me and he said, "I'm going to activate everybody at this event." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean you're going to activate everybody?" He's like, "I'm just going to make sure every." I'm like, "What does that mean?" He's like, "I'm going to make sure everybody's having the highest level of excitement, that they're just pumped up, that they're present, not worrying about everything else going on, that they're really authentic and really enjoying the experience and all this stuff." And I'm like, "All right, that sounds cool, but I'm going to activate more people than you do." Uh,
I've
so
never heard this original story, so this is good to hear finally.
so we're driving up there and we just start activating everybody, and everybody's like, "What the hell are these guys doing?" Right? Um, so there was a big a big response to it afterwards, and people were really like into it and energetic about it. And so we decided to actually start something. We thought, hey, I think we have something here. So we started. We came up with the 5 core principles of activation, and it stands for paper, PAPER. So it's positivity, authenticity, passion, empathy, and resilience. And we try to live by those 5 core pillars on a day-to-day basis. I know I try to do it in my life, and that's what our movement is all about. And we were just kind of tired of seeing everybody complaining, whether it's about the elections, like, because this is kind of how it started. It was back 2 years ago, complaining about
Hmm.
everybody posting. This is so divisive. People complaining about their mother-in-law, their father-in-law, their this, their that. And instead of like being grateful and having gratitude for everything that we have, people's tendencies are just to bitch and moan about what they don't have, right?
Hmm.
So being able to kind of put something positive out there, it's also a reminder to myself every day that, hey, yeah, you got a roof over your head. You're in the United States of America, the, land of the free. You can do anything you want. I grew up in a middle class family. I have nothing to complain about. Nothing. Right. When I was bitching and moaning about this lawsuit and bitching and moaning about my employees and bitching and moaning about my clients, bitching and moaning about the bank cutting my credit line off and, every single thing when I look back on how I was acting was complaint, 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 negative, negative, negative. And it was on autopilot. Like I just did not have the exposure to the tools to think positively, to be optimistic. I wasn't exposed to it because I didn't let it in. But as soon as I started exposing myself to it, I could slowly shift my mindset and slowly incorporate new things to really live a better life
Hmm.
and to make sure that whatever I do, like it's truly what I, from the heart, am driven by. And it's truly what I feel like I've been put on this earth to do. So like I like to consider myself an expert in how not to do shit.
So, what are those like? You got this book, and we don't have to give away the meat of it because I want all the listeners to go pick it up when you have it. But like, what are some of the main lessons? The main shit that you said you shouldn't do. And yet there's a lot of stuff that you've shared that you've obviously learned a lot from because you're way different. You and I were talking about it's all about growing and creating the new person that you want to be. But like, if one of the listeners is stuck or they're in that negative feedback loop, what are the lessons that you learned and the things that they should be doing to get out of it?
Well, the first thing I would say is emotional decision making. Nothing good happens on text message. Nothing good happens making a emotional decision. When you're in the middle of something and it's a trigger point for you, you're going to know that. You have to be able to identify your trigger points.
Mhm.
So, an easy example is my trigger point is an email from my lawyers. Okay. Whenever I see the email come in with the lawyer name on it, okay, I know I'm going to be triggered.
Mhm.
So I created a folder. I can see when the folder, highlights itself when the new emails come in. And I make sure sometimes I don't read that email for 2 days. I make sure I'm in a great mood. Okay. So whatever happens, I'm going to react to it, in a much more pragmatic fashion,
Mhm.
much more relaxed fashion. Sometimes I would go into the other room and literally meditate for 15 minutes. Then I would get up and read the email. Right. So just taking a step back and a deep breath before you react to something and not acting emotionally about it, regardless of how much emotion it involves, because there's a bigger picture to it. Like
Mhm.
every action has a reaction. So if you're going to send something, you expect you're going to get something back, and then just, it's going to be that much more challenging or difficult to solve that particular issue you're dealing
Mhm.
with. And
Mhm.
again, this isn't just for entrepreneurs. I mean, this is
For
just
everybody.
life,
Yep.
right? Because I did this in other areas of my life as well. So I would say that that's kind of like the first thing that I learned. And then about being stuck, uh, you know, it's daunting when you say you want to change your whole life. Like if you look at it from that, it's like if you're trying to lose weight and you're like, I need to lose 100 pounds, right? If anybody actually looked at that and said, I got to lose 100 pounds, like most people will never start
Right.
because it's too big of a hill to climb. Like for instance, I just climbed Mount Kilimanjaro earlier this year. Like it was one of the most amazing things I've ever done in my life. It's 19,000 feet. If somebody said to me, hey, you're going to climb 19,000 feet, you're going to run a marathon, right? I've run some marathons. Like when you think about 26.2 miles, like there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to. But then when you get get a schedule together and you break down your training sessions and you see, oh, the first week the biggest run is 6 miles. Oh, I could get through that, right? And then you've done 6 miles, and then you look at the next week and you're like, oh, they bumped it up to 8 miles this week. Well, I did 6 last week. I could get through 8. And then all of a sudden the next one's 12, and you're like, 12, that's going to be tough. That's doubling. Now we're doubling it. But then you get through it, and then you slowly crack away at the things you've convinced yourself you think you can't do by taking small actions and small positive steps forward. And that's what I discovered. I discovered that the smallest change can lead to the biggest difference, because that's how you can pick up your momentum.
Yeah, it's if you read the book Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy.
Yep, I have that book.
Eat that damn frog in the morning, right? Because it's the highest leverage of things that'll actually change the trajectory of where you're going. I mean, it's, you and I could probably do a whole nother show on this because I could geek out on this stuff for a long time. But I mean, it's the ego, and there's this we've got this group coach, because there's an entrepreneur group here in the Twin Cities where it's like above the line or below the line, and it's really where you're coming at from your inner self. The bottom of the line, I'll have to send you this, and I'll link to it for the listeners, but it's like despair and hopelessness, but the top is just absolute peace and joy. And so like literally what you dish out is what you attract. And it's like you get into these feedback loops, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes suppressing your ego and your emotions. And because it's a challenging thing though, and then going back to taking one bite at a time, because otherwise it's just, like you said, it's daunting, but you totally can change it. What are the, so of all the stuff that we've talked about, you've mentioned a lot of different things. You just kind of talked about some of your lessons. Is there something that we haven't talked about, or something you want to highlight and leave the listeners with?
It doesn't take a lot to make a change. That's really what I want the listeners to know. That start with something small, and that it will set a range of decisions in motion that you don't even know will happen. So again, I mean, I think the biggest overall theme is just like small changes can lead to, monumental outcomes. And if you want to change your situation, the first thing I did when I came back from Bali is get rid of the cable box. That led to then me starting to listen to podcasts, right? Found a positive podcast. Then I started doing some meditation for 10, 15 minutes a day. Then that put me in a totally different state of mind. And I haven't been consistent with my meditation. I'll be the first one to admit it. But every time I do, like, I have just such a clear vision of how I want to move forward. And I'm actually going to a meditation today, actually. So I'm proud of myself. Yes.
Nice.
So that led to that. Then I had like all these other things that were weighing me down, and I just slowly checked them off my list. And it is okay to say no. Another important thing. It's okay to say no. I used to say yes and try to please everybody, but you can't please everybody, and you can't be the best person you are unless you love and respect yourself. And if you're miserable all the time about everything that you're doing, and you feel stuck, and you feel like this is not the life you want to live, then you're not going to be good for anybody. You have to get right yourself. So if you want to be good for others. And as a leader in my company, I was never able to do that until the end, until like my last year there. And I had already determined I was like getting out. So it was easier for me to be positive at the time, because I was just like, I had had enough of it. But yeah, I mean, that would be my overall theme.
If the listeners want to get in touch with you or look for the book, or follow you, what's the best way?
So I would say, find me on any of the social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, I'm MDASH1. And on Facebook, I'm just Michael-DASH. Same on LinkedIn. And then my book will be coming out early next year. I do have a website. It's michaelg-.com. And there's a little link there. You can just put your email address in, and keep you updated on when the book's coming out and so.
That's awesome. Michael, I had a blast on the show, man.
You as well. It was great. It was great being a guest. Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your story.
Absolutely.